Hello and welcome. I'm Nick, and today I'm going to be running through some of the basic concepts and useful information for anyone new to Tabletop Simulator. I'm going to try to stick to default settings and tools so that nobody is overwhelmed by concepts intended for advanced users. If you look at the description below the video, I'm going to put in time codes so that you can jump around and review specific topics. When you create a new session, you are seated at a table in an empty room with the window for loading a game open. But let's take a moment to talk about what you can do inside of an empty room before we get into loading any pre-built game setups. The table is the centerpiece of the room, and it has a number of player seats associated with it. Anyone joining a room selects a seat to sit at, and this determines their default position at the table, marked by their name and portrait at that seat. There are a handful of different tables to choose from, and they can be selected by going to the Objects, Tables menu. Most of the tables will have 8 seats available, but they could have more or less depending on the table. Choose the table that best fits the game that you're playing, or the one that is your favorite. Every table also has the Spectator seat. Multiple people can sit at this seat, but they will not have a place at the table, nor will they be able to interact with anything at the table. In addition to marking a player's place at the table, each seat also comes with a hand, which is a zone in front of that player's seat where cards can be held and kept hidden from other players. Cards in a player's hand will try to arrange themselves, but you're free to move them around and reorient them as you wish. While the hand is a physical space in front of the player's seat, the contents of it are also displayed at the bottom of each player's screen. This view will move around as the player moves around the game world and can be interacted with in all of the same ways. The contents of a player's hand are only visible to the player assigned to that seat. To all other players, they will appear using a special hidden face. At any time, you can return to the default camera position for your assigned seat by pressing the spacebar. With everyone seated, we can start talking about how to interact with the pieces on the table. This section is mainly going to be a lot of important keyboard shortcuts, but we begin by spawning an object from the Objects Components menu. You can click on an object in this menu to spawn it at the center of the table, or you can drag to spawn the object at a specific point on the table. You can pick up an object and move it around using the left mouse button, releasing to drop it. Or you can whip select to have one or more objects selected without hanging on to it. Most of the following operations can be done while holding onto an object, while having one or more objects selected, or while simply hovering over an object. The Q and E keys are used to rotate objects. You can change how much an object rotates using the rotation degrees option at the top of your screen. The F key is used to flip objects over. This is a very common thing to do with cards. R is your randomize key. It can be used to roll dice, shuffle card decks, or otherwise randomize the contents of a group. This can also be done with most objects by picking them up and shaking your mouse around before releasing. The plus and minus keys can be used to grow and shrink objects respectively. However, if you're only growing an object to better read it, you can hold the Alt key and hover over any object to get a magnified view of that object. You can change the level of magnification with the mouse wheel. You can group objects together using the G key. However, this only works on objects that have an inherent group form. If you are the host of the room, Your standard copy and paste hotkeys work as well, allowing you to create more of a specific object when need arises. And when you no longer need an object, you can use the delete key to remove it from the room. Before we finish, let's focus in with a little more detail on two of the most common item types, dice and cards. Dice work more or less how you expect. You can pick them up and roll them in order to generate results, or you can randomize them in place using the R key. Hovering over a die will display a tooltip with the showing face of the die, and if you have multiple dice selected at once, hovering over the group will give you the individual and total results of all those faces. For anyone familiar with using dice as counters, you can use the number keys on the keyboard to set a die to have a selected face showing. Cards and decks are a rather robust object type. In addition to being able to be placed into players' hands, any two cards when stacked on each other will form into a deck. Decks then can be further stacked on each other to combine them into one larger deck. When grouped together into a deck, all cards are given the same facing and orientation. To draw a card off of the top of the deck, quickly pick up and then move your cursor away from the deck. If you want to move the entire deck, you need to click and hold in place until the entire deck lifts. A number of common deck operations can be found in the context menu, brought up by right-clicking on a deck. Draw moves the top card of the deck directly to your hand. Deal moves a card from the top of the deck to the hands of every seated player. The pop-out menu allows you to deal to a specific player or to all seats at the table, regardless of if anyone is seated there or not. Search brings up a window containing all of the cards within the given deck, allowing you to view, rearrange, or draw specific cards from the deck without physically manipulating it on the table. Cut divides the deck into two piles with the defined sizes, or Split will divide the deck into the requested number of piles, all with equal sizes. Now let's put everything together with an example. Let's say you and a friend want to play a modified version of War that you just came up with. We can begin by going to the Objects menu, selecting Components, selecting Cards, and spawning a standard deck. For this game, we're also going to need a D6 and two D12s. Shuffle the deck a few times with R, and then we'll also use R to roll the die to get a random number. 4. We'll use the right-click menu to deal 4 cards to each player, and then use the split option to divide the deck in two, one for each player. The D12s are going to be used to keep track of life, so we'll move one near each player and use the number keys to set their starting value to 6. Each player plays a face-down card from their hands, and after revealing both at the same time, whoever has the lower card takes the difference as health damage. Played cards are grouped and moved to a discard pile, and then each player draws from their deck into their hands back up to the initial rolled value of 4. And then play continues this way until both players are satisfied or bored, or whenever they decide to stop. Thank you for joining me in this basic tutorial. Hopefully with this knowledge you should have an understanding of how to do many of the common tasks, know some of the item-specific tasks, and overall have a better understanding of the kind of interactions that are possible in Tabletop Simulator. Hopefully you're feeling more confident and are ready to go out there and start playing some games.